I love Mike and what he's doing here. So, I tested a kid a couple weeks ago, and my experience, the kids I see, girls tend to talk about their feelings more easily than boys. But this kid was kind of extreme. I started asking him, I always ask kids, the first question in an interview is, when you think about the kids you know, you're about as happy as most kids, happy or less happy. And this boy's 10 years old, he goes, let's play the library game. I said, what's that? He said, so Ned and I have been friends and doing stuff together for 7 or 8 years now, and we don't quite remember who introduced us, but we discovered pretty quickly that we have a lot of shared interests, and so we started lecturing together about what we can do to help kids become self-motivated. We also lectured quite a bit about stress and how it affects kids' development and how it affects their brains. And we really emphasize what good decision makers kids can be if we help them. And a couple years ago we decided to, let's write a book that summarizes the most useful stuff that we've learned. And Ned said, I think that everything that we talk about is related to a sense of control. And we knew that a low sense of control may be the most stressful thing in the universe. We know that it's hard to, new situations are stressful, unpredictability situations are stressful, things, if you feel threatened, it's stressful. But if any of that stuff's happening and you feel there's nothing I can do about it, it's really stressful. And so we figured that if so many of the kids we see have stress-related problems, and part of our goal, part of our mission really, is to help kids minimize their chronic level of stress and develop strong stress tolerance so they can function in stressful situations, that the sense of control must be a big deal. And we also knew that every place we looked in terms of how do kids become self-motivated, the key seemed to be autonomy. That the kids had the sense, they had to have a sense that this is my life and I get to make decisions about it and I get to learn from my own mistakes. And so we thought, if so much, many of the kids that I see, because people don't come to me if their kids are doing great and everything, they come to me if they're struggling in some ways. And so almost everybody, a lot of the kids I see have trouble maintaining motivation as they get older because they figure all the good things can be taken by the top students and I'm not a top student, so why bother? And I spend a lot of energy disabusing kids of that idea. And Ned sees a lot of kids who are just obsessively driven, and he has to kind of peel them off the wall and really be a non-anxious presence for them. And so we just figured that if this autonomy is the key to develop this kind of this self-motivation that's healthy, where you're going after something because you care about it, because it's important to you, because you love to do it, or you want to get good at it, as opposed to feeling that you have to do it, or feeling what's the point of trying. We figured this must be a really big deal. So we started researching, what do we know about a sense of control in general? Well, it turns out that because it's so good for the brain, when you feel that I can make choices, I can direct my own life, it's really good for your brain, that it's good for everything. So it's good for physical health and longevity. People in a nursing home, if you simply give them choices about, do you want your visitors to come at 2 or 4 p.m., that they live longer. If you give them choice, they live longer. If you're in a hospital bed and you're in great pain, and you can administer your own pain medication, you actually use less medication than if the doctors give it because it's so stressful not knowing when I'm going to be able to get more medication. It's a very powerful construct, and we also know that it's hugely related to mental health, to academic success, to career success. So we figured this is a big deal. Let's write a how-to manual about this for parents. How do you help kids develop a healthy sense of control, sense of autonomy? And I will say that I've been lecturing this area for 32 or 33 years, and this is the first sequence of lectures, the ones that Ned and I have been doing, that we didn't have a handout. And there's no handout because it's all in this friggin' book out that you can buy, and we want you to buy it. And I say that we've already got most of the money. We got a pretty nice advance for the books. So we aren't getting any more money for the books. But we love the idea that there's a lot of useful stuff in this book, and a lot of it's not easy. I mean, some stuff we talk about, it's not easy for parents to do. So we love the idea that it's in a book, and you can reread it when you doubt yourself or thinking, I need to remind myself that it's really safe not to worry about my kid all the time. It's not safe not to be on my kid about this or that. That I love the fact that it's in a book. And so I'll just say a couple things here. These really, we think about these twin scourges of stress-related mental health problems and these kind of what we consider to be kind of motivational disorders. And in terms of the mental health part, I'll just very briefly say that many of you know that we seem to be experiencing or witnessing an epidemic of mental health problems in kids, of stress-related problems in children. A woman at San Diego State in early 2000s was reporting that adolescents and young adults were 5 to 8 times more likely to report the symptoms of an anxiety disorder or major depression than young people were at the height of the Great Depression, during World War II, during the Vietnam War. And the same person wrote an article in The Atlantic last year summarizing her most recent research. She studies generational differences. What she said is that I've never seen anything like this spike in anxiety and mood problems since 2012. The article's called, "Has a Smartphone Destroyed a Generation?" She perceives the social media to be so destructive, particularly for girls. But the last, I think between 2005 and 2014, there was something like 37 or 38% increase in depression. So there's a lot of stress-related problems. And I've been doing this for 30, I've been working with kids for 40 years, and I'm old enough now that I'm having the kind of experience that one of my friends had where her 5-year-old granddaughter said, "Grandma, how old are you?" And she said 65. And the kid said, "Starting from 1?" But in any case, the control piece, and it's not control. It's not like the sense of control doesn't mean I know I can control. I'm supposed to control everything. It just means that I have a sense that I can direct my life, that I can make choices, that I'm not a helpless pawn of the universe. But there's tremendous research that finds that if kids can have control, you give them the experience of being able to control stressful situations, it changes their brain in a way that makes them copers, makes them resilient. The way kids become competent, the way they become resilient, is they cope with difficult situations, often with our support as necessary. But they handle things, and they realize I can handle it. And so that there's research with rats, there's research with human beings that says that experience of being able to control stressful situations, it develops that sense of control, and you go into coping mode in subsequent situations, even if you don't have any control over them.
So my sort of entree into this whole enterprise, I've been a test prep geek, if you will, for since 1993, and I've had a whole lot of experience working with a lot of kids, and most of whom are very academic, they're bright, they're really well supported. And I would have this experience, particularly early on, when a kid working with, she's bright, she'd done great on the practice tests, and she'd go and take the test, and then the scores would do this. And I was like, well, what happened there? And at first I was just anomalous, it was a bad day, it was just this one kid. But I would see this more often than I thought I should. And I would ask students, like, well, that test was so much harder than what we did for practice. I thought, well, that seems weird, because standardized tests have very few saving graces, but usually sort of, being standardized is one of them. So that was surprising. So I went to go and take an SAT. I was probably 28 at the time. I went to Whitman High School. Actually, one of my students sitting right next to me, no peeking when you do this, right? And while I'm sitting there waiting for this whole thing to get started, I'm sort of eavesdropping on all the teens and what they're talking about, thinking, oh, these poor stressed out kids. I wonder what's going through their heads. And as I'm doing this, for no particular reason, I check my own pulse. 140 beats a minute. Okay, well, so all that advice that I've given people of, hey, you're great, don't worry about it, no need to be stressed, you'll be fine. Let's get a new game plan, right? Because I'm a professional test taker. I have very few skills. Taking tests is one of them. Oh, and at age 28, it probably didn't matter that much for college admissions because I'd already done it. They didn't want me back. There was no going back again. So I really started trying to understand what goes on with brains. From a performance perspective, what impacts it? What is that? And exactly as Bill describes, the things that I sort of stumbled on, really just by reading in my sort of, shop working, trying these things out with kids, were things like getting more sleep, right? And having a good game plan, and having a plan B worked out, and tools, and all these things that would help kids feel like they're a little bit more in control of that situation. It lowered their stress, and it improved their performance. Now, most of you all know about the prefrontal cortex, okay. So really quickly, the prefrontal cortex, in which reside executive functions, right? So the ability to anticipate the future, to plan, decision-making, motivation, inhibition, get off the phone, go to bed, right? Emotional and mental flexibility. Kind of important things to navigate, a stupid test, maybe school, relationships, work, life, that kind of thing. The amygdala, the threat detector of your brain, is square in the middle. And these two things kind of battle for control of your brain. So when the amygdala goes off, someone described this as, it's like pulling the fire alarm, and everything shows up at once. The police department, the fire department, the SWAT team, the hazmat, everything's there, and there is no room left for the professor being like, excuse me, wouldn't it be easier if, no, gone. So my whole job, in many ways, is trying to get kids to quiet that amygdala a little bit so that the thinking part of the brain works. Because at some level, it doesn't really matter what I try to force into their brains if when they get to the test, they lose their minds, right? It doesn't work so well. And so our take on this ultimately is that, and my stump speech to all these parents who sort of push me to push their kids, the most important work of childhood and adolescence is developing the brain you're going to have for the rest of your life. Compared to that, an SAT score is not so important. And I feel a little weird. I get these conversations where, like, the voice of reason in this whole dynamic is the test prep tutor. Okay. Now, to Bill's point, we see a ton more anxiety than we used to. And it's DC, but it's not just DC. It's everywhere. And Bill references Gene Twenge, who talks about this. This is everywhere. And so we're really on a crusade to try to bend that needle back a little bit. Because if your kid develops a stress disorder, anxiety, or God help you, depression, it scars their brains in ways that you really don't want them to be scarred. And people can bounce back from all sorts of things. 7th grade was the worst year of your life. Okay, nobody cares about those grades. High school, you didn't get there are all sorts of things that can't go well, and you can succeed later on. But we really want to take seriously the development of the brain. Now, beyond the motivation, beyond the stress piece, of course, there's motivation. And so let me just share with you a little bit, in a nutshell, the research that we have in there on motivation. So there's this really cool model of what's called self-determination theory. It's a model for intrinsic motivation as opposed to extrinsic, right? I'll do this to get carrots and sticks. I'll do it to get the grade, to get the reward, or if I don't do something, you'll take away my cell phone. Those are motivational, but they're extrinsic, right? We want intrinsic. We want kids to want to do whatever it is they want to do. So this model called self-determination theory, it's wonderful. It's very elegant, and it holds that to be internally motivated, I need 3 things. I need a sense of competency, right? If you play tennis the way I do, you won't want to play tennis very much. Okay? If you can't do math at all, you really don't want to do it, right? You need a sense of relatedness, and this is why places like McLean are so important. When I first meet with kids, the first day conversations will tell me about school, blah, blah, blah. Oh, what's your favorite class? Do you get a favorite class? And they'll say, I really like math this year. And I say, well, and that's great. I so love that. And the follow-up question is always, is that the class or is that the teacher? And as you'd expect, more than half the time, oh, Miss Sanchez, she's great. I never really liked math that much, but I don't know, somehow this year is really great. Because that relatedness, that personal connection is enormously, at a chemical level, it's important. And then the third thing is autonomy. This sense that what I do makes a difference, that I can do something and get to where I want to be. So Bill and I called up, Bill actually had given a presentation with Edward Deasy, who founded this, in the 70s? It's been around for a while, 80s? This model?
The self-determination, yeah, 80s.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we got him on the phone and said, Professor Deasy, we really love self-determination theory. Of those things, our experience is that, our hunch is that, the autonomy piece is the most important. Is that right? And he said, yeah, it is. He said, if there's anything that you really want to put a finger on, it's really try to foster that sense of autonomy. The challenge in places like DC, and I live here so I guess I can pick on us, is that the tendency, if we're going to push on competency, relatedness, or autonomy, the thing that we tend to be all in on is the competency piece. Oh my God, she's not on the travel soccer team. It's second grade. How is she ever going to get a college scholarship? What are you going to do? What are you doing about this, right? I got a call from a parent the other day. So I'd like to talk about math tutoring for my daughter because her older brother was in the advanced math track. We really like to keep her in the advanced math track because to see how good it is for his self-esteem. But she's not quite as good at math, so we've been trying to support her with tutoring. And do you think that twice a week? I mean, we've been doing twice a week, but we think maybe we should be doing 3 days a week. 3 days a week of math tutoring. Does that seem like a good idea to you? Oh, and by the way, she's in 4th grade. So when I pulled my head up from my keyboard, I was like, holy smokes, what does that feel? I mean, I've yet to meet a 4th grader who I can imagine coming home and say, hey, Mommy, can I do tutoring 3 days a week rather than play with my friends because math is really hard for me? I want to do more of that. Doesn't seem probable to me. But if you think about this idea for the self-determination theory, the important thing to keep in mind, these 3 things have to be in balance. It's a 3-legged stool. So if you make one really big with the competency piece, but you're sort of shaving off the autonomy and the relatedness, it feels a little like it's not going to work so well. So we really try to focus on the autonomy, and we'll talk about the relatedness. That one should be relatively easy for parents, but we'll talk about how and why. The other 2 models we'll look at really quickly. People know the work of Carol Dweck, a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset. I'm no good at math. Well, not right now, but I know we can get better at this, right? You need a different teacher, one you really like, and Miss Sanchez, she's going to work this whole thing out. We might have to do a little work to catch up on this, but look, nobody jumped out of the womb knowing the Pythagorean theorem, and so let's work a little bit harder at that. And that belief that you can get better at something by working at it is such, that for me is the sense of control writ large. I don't like where I am, I want to be someplace else, and there are things I can do to get there. And it's a hugely hopeful model. When we gave a talk at Bullis the other day, and there's a family who's actually, I think, referenced in the book, and Mom was there, and this boy had been, when he was at the lab school, he was the most learning disabled kid at the lab school. So this was a kid we're learning. Mom said something like, and she raised her hand and told the story, she said he had something like 29 different learning disabilities. And now he's getting A's and B's as a freshman at the University of Maryland.
I tested this kid, and I called people in the lab school, and they said he's really the most LD kid in the 6th grade here. And the beautiful thing about, just parenthetically,
sure,
this kid wanted to bust out. A lot of kids, after a while, he wanted to go to public school. Parents wouldn't let him. Eventually, they let him go to I think the Riken program for LD kids, only at Good Counsel. And he just kept pushing. I want to be in harder programs. And when she told me, and I hadn't tested him since his 6th grade, when she told me he's at the University of Maryland, I couldn't freaking believe it. I could because I've seen thousands of kids and tremendous stories. It's very cool.
It's really neat.
Yeah.
And then the third model we talk about is the concept of flow. People might know this idea of flow, being in the zone. And so flow is when you're deeply immersed in something. It's complete focus, it's high determination, it's often high challenge, it's low threat. And the brain chemistry in this, rather than being driven by cortisol, which is kind of the fear chemical, like I have to do this, right? This is I get to. Dopamine is this chemical of the anticipation of reward. And in a perfect world, we all get the experience of doing this. Oftentimes we see this most, not in school, though it can happen there. It most often happens in what this great guy named Reed Larson describes as the passionate pursuit of pastimes. And you'll see kids, my son, I have a sophomore son, and he had a day off from school, a half day, I can't remember what. And I came home and I said, well, how was your day, pal? He said, great. He said, I spent about an hour and a half doing homework and I got that crap done. But let me show you this song that's been, I've been working on this for like 5 hours. Awesome. I was so jazzed, right? And he was so jazzed. I mean, that is a model because with homework, we work to get it done. It's good enough. But with a piece of music or writing poetry or coding or rock, I mean, you're always, can I try something a little bit more challenging? Can I try something a little bit harder? And we want kids to have this as much as possible because that brain state is wiring your brain to want to work hard at things that matter to you. And then it's simply a matter of growing up and adding on to childhood passions, adult passions, and adult obligations, work and family and whatever. And you learn you have that brain system where you can also then work hard at those things as well.
You know, and the neuroscientists say that teenagers are sculpting the adult brain. You go through puberty and you have this whole new burst of synapses, and depending on how you use your brain, these synapses, some of them stick as part of your adult brain, and some of them die away. And so when I read Reed Larson 15 years ago, who said that in his research on self-motivation, he said, it's not through dutifully doing your homework, it's through passionately pursuing the stuff that you love. And it made sense to me because I had either, depending on how I look at it, I was a C+ or a B- student in high school. I had a 2.8 grade point average, and I probably read 2 books the whole time I was in high school. I turned in everything late, and it just wasn't a priority for me. And what was a priority was rock and roll, and like your son. You know, I played in the band, and I would routinely, I'd tell myself, I'll go ahead and practice for an hour or half an hour, then I'll do some homework. And I'd come out of this room where I had an organ and a guitar 2.5 hours later, and I had no idea where the time went. Because I was focused on, I'd be listening to something over and over again to figure out how to play it. I'd be teaching myself song structure. I'd be practicing my instrument. And I really think that I sculpted a brain through this passionate pursuit of rock and roll, that when I found something to study and I found something that made sense to me career-wise, I could go pedal to the metal. And I'm at 68, I can still go pedal to the metal. I just think that I really think it's true. And so when I see kids,
And he's a really good rock and roller.
well, you know, I'm not bad, but you know, when I see kids now, and I see a ton of kids who aren't that motivated for school, and if they are motivated for something, and video games don't necessarily count, but if they're motivated for developing themselves in some other way, that they love dance or music or art or sports, I say, I don't worry about you, because I know you're sculpting a brain that's going to be used to high focus, high energy, high determination, high effort, low stress. That's where you want to be. And also, let's talk about the stuff in the book that we recommend to parents. And I'll say that raising children has never been easy. In fact, I tested this kid 30-some years ago, and his mother was a humorist. And she said, Bill, we really shouldn't call it raising children. We should call it lowering parents. Because it's humbling, you know, and humiliating oftentimes. But so what happened for me is, in the first half of my career, I did a lot of psychotherapy with kids and families, as well as neuropsychological testing. And I routinely had the experience of I'd see an adult, I'd see a 40-year-old, and I'd say, so how can I help? And the 40-year-old would say, I spent the first 40 years of my life trying to live up to other people's expectations. Now I'm trying to figure out what's important to me. And I because I see so many kids with LD and ADHD, I saw dozens of mothers who said, I dread dinner time, because I know after dinner it's going to be a 2.5-hour fight about my kid's homework. And I would interview, I'd work with underachievers, and I'd ask them, if you don't turn in an assignment, who's most upset? And who would you guess is most upset?
Mom.
My mom. Who's next most upset? My dad. Who's next most upset? My teacher. Who's next most? My tutor. Who's next most? My therapist. Who's next most? and often it was my sister, because she's sick of our fighting, you know. But it just seemed to me that something's wrong with that picture. That the kid is never on the list. And one of my friends at this early in my career did this training in psychotherapy, and they were taught, don't work harder to help your clients solve their problems than they do, because you're going to weaken them, because they're going to think that somebody other than them is responsible for solving their problems. And over the last 25 years, I've trained hundreds of tutors, and I found this is one of the most useful things I can impart to them, is that if it feels to you, you're working with a kid, and it feels to you like you're working harder to help him get good at something than he is, you got to say, something's wrong with this picture, because if all the effort's coming from me, I'm going to weaken you. Because what I see all the time, is I see adults, oftentimes parents and teachers and tutors, spending 80 units of energy trying to help a kid, and the kids will spend 20. And if the adults get more anxious, they go up to 90, the kid will spend 10. That's just how energy in a system works. So what happened was that I wrote a paper that got summarized in McCall's magazine in 1986, and it was basically how not to fight with your kid about homework. And what I said is the first thing you do is you decide, I'm not going to fight. And you say, I love you too much to fight with you about your homework. And then what do? Well, then you say, I'm willing to do anything I can to help you. I'm willing to be your homework consultant. I'm willing to set my own consulting hours from 6:30 to 7:30. I'm willing to look and see what you got to do, help you plan it out. I'll sit and do some reading or balance my checkbook while you're working if you want. But I'm not willing to chase you around the house. I'm not willing to act like it's my job to make you do it. It couldn't be my job to make you do it because all you have to do is slump to the floor. I want to prop you up, prop your eyes open. You know and what I found was when parents decided I don't want to fight with the most precious thing in the world to me about something as stupid as homework. And they said, I'll help though. I want to do anything I can. I'll get you a tutor if you need it. That you change the energy in that way. That it wouldn't, not every kid was Johnny on the spot the next night. But if parents stuck with it, that they'd say stuff like, it lowered the temperature in our house by 20 degrees. And they said, and we want, I love the idea of treating kids respectfully, like they have a brain in their head and they want their life to work. And so I started applying this idea of parent as consultant, that in many ways, as much as we can, we want to think about ourselves as a consultant to our kid. I love the idea, that Ned and I both love this idea, that it's their life. It's the kid's life. The original title of our book was that we sent to our agent was "It's My Life." We love that idea, and kids are so competent, and adolescents are so competent that we love this consulting idea. Where part of it is that we offer help. We don't try to ram it down a kid's throat. That if we have advice, we say we rather than just lay it on a kid, and because a lot of parents say, "I've told them 100 times," well. Try this. Say,
101st.
Yeah. That always works, right? Try this. Say, I've got something that might help you. Do you want to hear it? Just frame it like that, respectfully. Do you want to hear my advice or not? That a former colleague of mine moved to Florida, and she sent me this card that said, "I want to give you some advice that my mother gave me, because I sure as hell won't be using it." And what we want, we want to think about, if we think of ourselves as consultants, kids start to come to us. And I'll tell you, I walked this walk with my own kids, and I had a daughter who could have raised herself. She's brilliant. She got a PhD when she was 26 in economics, University of Chicago. My son, who had LD and ADHD, I told him I could care less about his grades. I cared about his development. I never oversaw his homework. And I said, I'm willing to help. And in high school, he came to me a lot for help with writing. And it was really fun because all the energy was coming from him, and I was just there to support. It was great. And there were when he went to the Jewish day school, and I think there were 11 kids in this bonehead Hebrew class they had to create for kids with learning disabilities at the Jewish day school, and 3 of those kids had PhDs, including my own kid. It's amazing, and I know that this kind of idea, this consulting idea, works, and you've had some really experience with doing it.
Yeah, I've.
Tell that story.
That's great. I love it.
The client of mine, about a month ago, she sent me an email. She said, "I'm reading your book, and I just told my middle school son that I love you too much to fight with you about your homework." And first he hugged me. First he smiled, then he hugged me, and he said, "Something wrong with you, Mom?" One of my friends is reading my book, and she was at the pool at the YMCA, and a little, like a 4-year-old was having a tantrum about putting her shoes on, and my friend kind of obnoxiously went up to the kid and said, "Your mother loves you too much to fight with you about." And the kid looked
about your shoes.
Right.
That's funny. Yeah, we just we're somewhat obsessed with looking at our reviews on Amazon because it's kind of fun. We got one that just popped up this afternoon, and this mom said she was quoting the book so much to her teenage son that he decided he needed to read this thing too. And he went through and read it, and she said, and then he came to me and asked whether she could help him manage his use of technology. Whoa, right? How cool is that? It was pretty fun. The story I tell, but my so this idea of being we talk about this idea of being a consultant rather than a manager. Right? You want to help your kid, but you don't want to be on top of them all the time. I mean, we don't want to be micromanaged. Nobody likes that. And if you don't like it, why do you think a kid with a less fully developed brain is going to really embrace that? You're mistaken in that. So my son, when he was in 5th grade, my wife is an academic. She's a real academic family. She's a Latin teacher. Geekiest family in DC. It's really impressive. And she's also, like a lot of moms, remarkably organized, right? I mean, most households are run by moms, by and large, right? Because running a household is like running a small corporation. It takes unbelievable organizational and logistical abilities. And by and large, most men are wise enough to just say, tell me what to do and I'll do it. And that's, at least, that's worked for me. Maybe I shouldn't speak for my whole gender. But women, you?
Works
Yes.
for me.
Yeah, I know it does,
41
right?
years.
Yes. You got time for coffee tomorrow, Bill? I don't know. Ask Tar. So my son was in 5th grade. My wife was helping him with something, and there was an assignment that was not done. It had gone missing. Something was not as it should be. And my wife asked a question. She said, "Why didn't you hand it in?" Now, to be fair, many questions like that are particularly from a kid's perspective, are more accusations with a question mark at the end, right? So it got the response that you would imagine of, "You didn't remind me to." So I'm cooking dinner, I come out like, "Jeez, people." And I look at him, and I'm like, "Really, pal? You do not throw your mom under the bus. That's an important thing right there, okay?" And first of all, this is, if we've not been clear, this is your education, this is your life. You're responsible for doing 5th grade, if for no other reason that your mother's already done it and you deserve the opportunity yourself. And I look at her and I said, he has every reason to expect that you remind him, because you always have. And I don't know, do you want to keep doing this until 10th grade, senior of high school, sophomore year in college, marriage, first divorce? I mean, what is it, when do you get off that train? And so it was hard because her model had been a mom who was very involved, and she was very successful, and she thought this was the model to have. But we worked really hard at stepping back because, as Bill says, brains develop in the ways that they're used. And so if you want your kid to be self-driven, to be self-organized, he has to practice that himself, right? And anything that's worth doing well is worth doing poorly first, back to my tennis, right? It's going to be ugly before it gets any good. And that was him. I mean, it was great. We moved to this kind of consulting model where, do you have a plan for your homework? Yeah, I do. Great. Next time, do you have a plan for your homework for this weekend? Yeah, I do. Do you want to share it with me? Not really. Okay. And I can't say it was flawless. We had like in 6th grade, 5th grade history, whatever it was, you'd get a 52 on a test. And I'd come in because I think of myself as a great tutor, and I'd ask questions. So do you know why you got a 52 on that? And I try to be as neutral as I can. And he likes to make me work hard. And he'd say things like, "Because I missed too many questions." You're really going to make this hard on me, aren't you, Ned? But then it was like, well, did you miss things? Were you surprised by what was on the test? Do you feel like you got there and forgot what the stuff was? Which would be, okay, then that's one, sleep deprivation. Did you make careless mistakes? Maybe that was because you're rushing. Trying to understand what's the reason before I offer a solution, right? And it ultimately got to, I think I studied the wrong chapter. So then it's an organizational issue. And I've really kept up this model. My son's now in 10th grade. His rehab counselor said he's doing great.
He's sober 3 months.
Right?
Yeah.
He's doing beautifully. He's doing better than I would have asked him to do academically. And the great part, my favorite thing about this was probably about 6 weeks ago. There was a school dance, and he got invited to the party that's after the dance, which is like where all the, that's like the real thing, right? Like his daddy's a little geeky, so this is like first time getting invited, right, to this dance. And he and I and my wife and daughter, we were out for a walk, and it was an afternoon, and that dance was that night. And he says, "Hey, Dad, can I ask you a question?" I'm like, "Sure, pal, what's your question?" "So there's that party after the dance." "Yeah." "What should I do if people are drinking there?" I tried to play it cool, right? And inside, I'm like, I've been, because that's the conversation you want to have, right? I mean, everybody else can be on top of him about, his trigonometry or helping with the editing, but I don't want him to have that conversation with all his friends. I want him to have it with me. And I'm convinced of it. Have you done your homework? Have you done your homework? Have you done your homework? Have you done your homework for 5 years? Actually, I just had a student come in about 3 weeks ago. His parents had come to our first book talk, and I hadn't seen him for a couple months. He came back. And I said, "Oh, I saw your parents at the book talk." I said, did they actually read the book? And because people buy books and then don't know. And he said, well, yeah, they did. And I said, has it made much of a difference for you? And he said, well, yeah. They've stopped asking me, shouldn't you be doing your homework? And again, a little victory dance. Now this kid is a junior in high school. He's a year away from going to college. Oh, and by the way, he has straight A's. And what he's just told me is that what his parents perceived as help was screwing up the motivation that he already had, right? Because I asked him, he said, every time I said, what would it feel when they said, shouldn't you be doing your homework? He said, every time they asked me, shouldn't you be doing my homework, it simply made me not want to do my homework. So I've been quizzing all my students now, right? Because I'm into quizzes and tests and stuff. Of the 37 children that I've asked, everyone has given me the exact same answer. If you think that your kid is the one who really appreciates that, your chances that's the null set. Now, I'll also just say that this idea of thinking yourself as a consultant, not a manager, is so much less stressful. Because if your kid doesn't want to do it for this, that, or the other reason, and you're really trying to use your energy to force it on kids, it's painful, right? Because then they resist what you know is in their best interest, right? And they fight you in ways that are very curious, right? Keep in mind, if we go back to prefrontal cortex and amygdala, right? When kids feel that I'm coming at you and I'm going to force this on you, right? They get super defensive, right? And then they're not thinking clearly because this stuff has gone bye-bye. And all that wisdom that we're trying to share with them, they're not even going to hear it. So to echoes Bill's point, what I'll just do with my kids and the students that I work with as well, is say, can I give you some advice on that? Would you like to hear my perspective? Or is it all right if I tell you something? And I said, no, I don't have time for this. I just don't tell them, right? If anyone has ever had the experience of giving advice to people who just said they didn't want it, I'd love to hear about that. So the other thing, along this line is that one of the things that could be particularly for adolescents that's remarkably helpful for their motivation and certainly your relationship with them is to tell kids that have confidence in your ability to make good decisions about your own life especially, and that when you make mistakes, which you will because you're human, right, and you're my kids, such that, when you make mistakes, that you'll figure out what the best plan is from there. And I say this with all due respect, knowing how hard it is to watch your kids make mistakes that you know they're going to make. You can see it coming. You can see it. See, I'll remind me to tell the story about Matthew and Fortnite when we get around to video games. This is fantastic. You know that they're going to make these mistakes, but you want to let them make these mistakes because we want kids to have as much practice now as they possibly can making decisions about their lives. Because no matter how old your kids are, it's only a few years before they go off to college with an enormous amount of your money, by the way, right? And the only way that you can try to control them is text them. Did you do? And they should, right? You can just ignore it. At some point, when my mother was driving me nuts with emails and emails and emails, I put her into my spam filter. Came back a few months later. Right? So we want kids to have experience making decisions, particularly while they're at home, and we can see it and offer advice. Because we're not saying just let your kids run their own lives. We're saying we want to say, we trust you make good decisions, but we want to have this be collaborative, right? And then the last thing really is that, to Bill's point about I'm a 40-year-old man and I don't know what I want to do with myself, right? It sure seems like that process should start a whole lot earlier. And a huge part of knowing what you want out of life is emotional, right? Really, what we all start, we all do this. We start with wants. And then we figure out how do we get what we want, right? And for us, I want all of your children to be as happy and successful as they possibly can. And trust me when I say that your kids want that for themselves as well. And so we want to be consultative. We want to be supporting them, telling them it's going to be their call, but giving them an experience trying to build that life for themselves. And do that now when the people who care most about them are close enough by to give a helping hand, when they say that they want that help.
And this idea about years ago, when I first started my practice, it was very common for kids to repeat a grade, especially for kindergarten and first grade. And I'd see somebody who's 19, and I'd say, or 20, and I'd say, so where are you in school? They'd say, well, I'm a freshman in college. I should be a sophomore, but my parents made me repeat the first grade. They're still pissed about it all those years later, you know? And so what I started doing, maybe this sounds crazy, but I started saying, even first grader, I said, tell your kid, nobody's going to make you repeat the first grade. But let's think through the pros and cons so you can make a good decision for yourself. And I'd see first graders who would spend the whole summer thinking about it and asking the parents, well, what about this? And the parents would say, you know, if you repeat, you know, it's going to be easy. It's going to be easier for you when you get to second grade. It'll be easier, and you like some of the kids from kindergarten so that they can be your friends. But it's also possible that kids will say, "Oh, you're retarded," or "You flunked," or something. You have to deal with that. And I have kids say that I know I'm ready. I can do it. You know, I can go on to second grade, and can I get a tutor if I need it? Yeah, okay. And I have kids say that I can stay back. That'll probably be best for me, and I don't care if people call me stupid. I know I'm stupid. I'd see it in little kids. And I think that what I love, there's a part in our book where we say, just when you make a decision for a kid, you kind of lay it on him. Just do a cost-benefit analysis. And I'm not saying that we say in the book there are times where you have to override what kids want. There's some kids who are in some states where they not physical state, mental states where they really can't make decisions, or they won't listen to other points of view. We want kids to make informed decisions, and our motto is, if kids are willing to make an informed decision, go with their decision unless it's crazy. Crazy being the most reasonable people think that's a terrible idea. But the cost-benefit part is simply that the cost or the benefit of overriding. A kid doesn't want to do tutoring over the summer, and you got to make him do it. Is maybe you get something out of the tutoring, but and maybe you get really lucky. It kind of lights a spark. But usually when kids feel forced to do something, they don't want to give you the satisfaction of the benefit from it. And the cost is that the message you're saying is, don't trust yourself. Don't trust your own judgment about what's right for you, because I know better than you do. And I think that we want to be cautious about that. And I'll also say that the third part of this parent consultant idea is simply kind of offer to help. Don't try to force it down a kid's throat. Trust kids to make decisions, and let kids solve their own problems as much as possible. Any problem that a kid can solve for himself with encouragement, with counseling, that's how kids become independent. That's how they become resilient, is by solving their own problems. Even it's really like things that are very kind of can be devastating, like this second grade girl. One of our tutors told me about this girl he was tutoring, and apparently the teacher said, "What's the biggest number in the world?" And this girl tentatively raised her hand and said, 23,000. The teacher said, "Well, what about 23,001?" And the girl said, "I was so close."
You know, part of this idea of sort of watching your kids, knowing that they're going to, you know, drive the car into, you know, things and things are going to get bumped up. It's hard, right? Because all that we really want for our kids is that they're happy and successful in every way possible, right? And so our tendency is to try to shield them from anything that could be, you know, that could bruise them. We don't want them to be sad. We don't want them to be hurt. You know, we don't want. But the literature suggests that people need to experience, those things themselves. If you think about yourself, chances are there were things somewhere in your past that were really hard. You know, things you don't want to relive. But I'll say for me, you know, the source of much of my strength is the sense of what I got through. And I think, well, how bad can this be? Because I know I got through that, right? There's this great study. How should I say this? So part of the challenge of doing that, of watching your kids and letting them, you know, is having some confidence that they're going to be okay, and some confidence that it will also be good for their brain development. Much of the work, as Bill talks about lowering parents, much of the work, the hard part is for us, because it makes you really stressed to see bad things happen to the thing that you loved since it was this big, right? So we have a whole chapter in our book about the benefit of being a non-anxious presence, which is kind of a high ask in DC, particularly these days. We got this term from a guy named Edwin Freeman, who was a rabbi, and he was also a business consultant, and he worked with churches and synagogues and corporations and organizations, including families, which are, again, an organization. And what he showed was, what he discussed was, then when the chief executive of any organization, including families, is emotionally reactive, you know, or fear-mongering, it does really poor things to the people in the orbit of that. And if we go back to prefrontal cortex, amygdala, stress is contagious, right? We've all had the experience. You get on a plane, you sit down next to someone who is just seething, and it's like, and you feel, I mean, can I have a different seat? I mean, it feels terrible, right? That person isn't angry at you yet, right? They just sat down, right? And something really unhappy, but you can feel that energy. We're supposed to, because the amygdala doesn't explain, it just senses threat. So if I, as a parent, come home and I'm just pissed off or whatever, and I walk in the door, you know, my wife and my kids are gonna feel that. So that's not great. I kind of come at this from the angle of doing all this ridiculous test prep and things that, you know, are hard, it's stressful. Junior years, it can be pretty stressful, right? And so I'll have kids come in and they'll, you know, vent to me about this was terrible, whatever, and I'm, you know, sort of do my test prep therapy, right? And then often within the first few minutes, they'll say, oh no, my dad's gonna kill me, my mom's gonna lose it. And I'm thinking, oh boy, that's hard, right? Because, I mean, I really want these kids to be successful, but what my interest and affection for them and care for their future is this much of what their parents hold. And this much that I know about them compared to what their parents know, because I've known them for, you know, 2 weeks and they've known them for 15 years. And that child, because they have the perception that mom or dad is going to be, they run away from mom or dad rather than to mom or dad, right? That conversation about the alcohol. If I have what do you mean you're going to the parties? Oh, that's it. Right. We want to have those experiences. We want to have those conversations, right? So if I'm really anxious, I'll make other people anxious. There's also really quick, we talk about this thing called mirror neurons. So mirror neurons are in the front of the prefrontal cortex, and and they kind of dance when we have conversations with other people. So if we go out and have coffee together, and you're sort of like, well, you know, it's really, you know, and and all these kind of micro expressions going across your face, my brain will sort of mimic them to try to figure out what are you really feeling. And it's particularly intense with people whom we know really well, because we know the landscape of those faces so well. So the deal is, you can't fake being a non-anxious presence, right? Because if I feel anxious, it's going to be all over my face, even though I don't try to. So when your kid says, you know, it's something terrible, you're like, don't worry, sweetheart, it'll be fine. Ooh. Oh, okay, cognitive dissonance. Do I believe what's being said to me by the person who loves me more than anything else in the world, or do I believe my own brain? So we talk a lot about this. The really great research on this idea of being a non-anxious presence was a guy named Michael Meany. We love this. He did this experiment with rat pups. Pups are baby rats. And they did this thing where they took these pups away, like the day they were born, and whisked them away, and these little lab technicians with a latex glove sat there with these things saying, how did you do this for like a half an hour? Now you've just been born, right? And you're like wanting like hairy mom to sort of snuggle up with you, and you've got like latex guy for a half an hour, like what? And so the stress in the brains is just off the charts, and they're just, it's terrible, oh my God, I've just been, right? And after about a half an hour, they give the pups back to mom. Here's your twitchy little thing, right? And if mom is a high licking and grooming rat, which is the rat equivalent of hugs and kisses, and you kind of come over there, bad people, just take it away. And you soothe this pup, the cortisol just bleeds right out of them. And then they did this over and over and over, from oh goodness to oh. And it had this profound outcome on the development of their brains. The prefrontal cortex had almost perfect regulation of the stress response. And when these rats became adult rats, having had all this in childhood, they became what Meany and his colleagues described as California laid-back rats. Wow, right? And these things were almost impossible to stress as adults, because no matter what terrible thing was happening to them, their brain's telling, it's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. We're going to get through this, because we always have. And for me, that's what we want our kids to have, is that ability that they can get through things without being pancaked. Because as much as I would wish it for everyone who's here and every child that you have, that nothing bad would ever touch their lives, that would make me the happiest guy in the world. But we know that's not the way life works. I mean, I suspect many of you I know in my household, I already have one kid who's really having a hard time. She's in 8th grade. She has no friends. 0 the last 2 years. It's hard, right? But what I do, you put on your own oxygen first. Put on your own oxygen first. Because while stress is contagious, so is calm. So Meany did this really cool thing where he took these other pups. They were born to basically neurotic parents, right? Basically that. They were designed to be anxious. And he took the pups from that. And neurotic pups were low licking and grooming. They're just not as good at nurturing. And they took these and brought them over to the high licking grooming mom. And just were fostered by, it's a different mom, right? And those pups also ended up being the same California laid-back rats, even though they were genetically programmed to be anxious. And so if you take all this stuff back to decision-making, planning, motivation, self-control, emotional mental flexibility, and we know that all those things work better when your stress response is quiet, and that all, set your child, how to get into good college, how to do well in school, how to have a successful life, and that one of the great value adds that we can have as parents is just to love our kids as much as we possibly can. And not only does it feel good, but that you're actually having a demonstrable cognitive enhancement to their brains. I'll take that any day of the week, right?
Yeah. I saw this kid years ago who had a really tough time. He really struggled in school. He drank quite a bit. He flunked out of college a couple times. And I asked him, he and his family consulted with me when he was 21 or so. And I said, is there anything your parents could have done when you were in high school that would have made this better? And he said, well, I think it would have helped if they were happy to see me sometimes. And because he was struggling, his parents felt that they always had to be disapproving of him, so they wouldn't give him the message it's okay for you to screw up like this. And so I think that, so when I used to work with families, I'd say, let's set the highest priority for our work together, enjoying your kid. And let's set that as the goal, and then work backwards. From whatever's keeping you from enjoying your kid, let's work on that. And because when you enjoy a kid, the kid experiences himself as a joy-producing organism, as opposed to a frustration or anger-producing organism. It's a good thing. And I'll also say that what's happened for me many times over the last 30 years is that I'll be talking with a parent, and it's either a mother or father, and they'll start crying, and they'll say, I just want him to feel good about himself. And after they stop crying, I say, well, I think we can more convincingly help him feel that it's okay to feel that he's okay, to feel good about himself, if we aren't worried sick about it. And I think that parents are because kids are so anxious these days, parents are saying to me, how can I help my kid? And certainly CBT is really effective. They need to meditate, medication can help. But also, we don't tend to think that one of the ways is, as I work on my own anxiety, and chapter 4 in our book is this non-anxious presence, and we go through various ways that we can work on being less anxious and less reactive, including focusing on the taking a long view. I mean, what I told you about these kids in this bonehead Hebrew class, 3 of them have PhDs. This kid at the University of Maryland now. I just have thousands of stories like that. And I think that we fear, all of our worry about our kids, it's about the future. So the fear that they're going to get stuck. Because if I could reassure you their kid is going to be great when he's 30, you wouldn't worry about where he is right now. That it's the fear of getting stuck. So you take a long view and you focus on the various people that you've heard about, like your kid who did okay, and or that we work on enjoying ourselves. We get enough rest. We meditate. Various things. So that's a really that non-anxious presence piece is a really important part. And then let's just take 5 minutes each to talk about the last 2.
Sure.
So there's 2 chapters in the book on what we call call radical downtime. And radical downtime is distinct from playing video games or watching television. It's where you seem to be doing absolutely nothing, but actually you're restoring and refreshing and growing your brain. And it's daydreaming, where you have time to simply reflect on yourself. When you do, you activate a part of the brain. If you just sit without your phone and you just start thinking about you think about yourself, you think about your relationships, you think about your past, about your future, and it turns out just having times where you just can think about yourself are hugely important for the kid's development of a coherent sense of identity, also for a sense of empathy. And so we want kids not to be over-programmed. A couple generations ago, one of my friend's mothers, when she complained that she was bored, her mother would say, "What do you want, a brass band? Go knock your head against the wall." You know, and I think that's not, we don't recommend that. But we do like the idea of kids having time, kind of downtime. And so the first chapter on radical downtime, it's about daydreaming and meditation. And we're a big fan of meditation. We like the mindfulness approach here. We're both big fans of transcendental meditation. I've done studies on TM and have had wonderful experiences with kids. When you get them to do it, it actually helps it dramatically. I tested this kid. We did the study with a kid, these middle school kids with ADHD who practice TM, and they all said at the end of 3 months that they're much less anxious, and most of them said, "I can study better, I can organize myself better." This one kid who was wildly impulsive said, "If I was walking in the hall before I started meditating and somebody bumped me, I just turn around and hit him. Now I've been meditating. If I'm walking in the hall and somebody bumps me, I stop and think, should I hit him or not?" You know, if you know ADHD, that's pretty good. You know, yeah, building a little time before a stimulus response. And then we have a whole chapter on the third aspect of radical downtime, which is sleep.
Yeah, and this is the thing that I get paid a whole lot of money to sort of talk to kids about sleep. And really, I mean, that's not what their parents sign up for, but that's always, always, always where I go. And we have study after study after study. That there's a study in there that they took 6th graders, they gave them basically an ERB, a standardized test. For 3 nights, they got 45 minutes less sleep. They tested like they were in 4th grade. 2 years of cognitive development, gone, right? From a stress perspective, being sleep deprived has the same effects on your brain as stress, right? If you're clinically sleep deprived, your amygdala is about 60% more reactive, and you respond intensely to everything in a negative way. So I tell this to all the kids. I say, well, you come in, if you're really well rested, you're going to have an easier time. But among other things, do you notice when you're tired, you feel like everyone around you is just being like cranky all the time? I had this kid the other day, super bright, ADHD, some executive function stuff. I said, do you ever notice how when you're really tired, you feel like your mom's like just really just like so much more annoying than normal, right? And he's, I mean, really sharp. Without missing a beat, he's like, my God, I must be tired all the time. It was fantastic. It was fantastic. But I have this experience where kids will take the test, do homework at one point when they've got a good night's sleep and then when they haven't. And it's like 2 different people taking the test. And they just don't believe me. But eventually, I always win these arguments because all the science is on my side and I'm a little stubborn. But it always lends me into the conversation, and I'll spare you the long version of it, but it ends with, so, oh, and by the way, where does your cell phone sleep at night? And they'll say, what do you mean? When you go to bed, where's your cell phone? Well, by my bedside table. Why do you ask? Oh, I'm so glad you said that. I'll tell you why I asked. And they go into all the literature on how unbelievably disruptive this is. And they don't want to hear it, of course, right? And they go on and on and on. And always, the sort of Hail Mary of a desperate teenager is, but I use it for my alarm clock. And I go, I don't think so, because I know that you use your mother as your alarm clock, right? Let's be honest, right? So I'm putting this in the session report. You're not going to have this anymore, at least for the week of the test. And I'm like, oh, don't do that. I said, oh, really quick question, because I feel kind of bad. What's your favorite color? Blue. Why do you ask? Because I have Amazon Prime. I am buying you an alarm clock right now. Because they'll say, but I use this for my alarm clock. I'm like, look, you go to Murray. They pay $40,000 for your Murray education, right? Several $100s an hour for my time. Your iPhone, right? And nobody in your life can come up with $14 for an alarm clock? How dumb do you think I am? Have an alarm clock. Have an alarm clock. Have an alarm clock. And I do this in a way that kids get it. That I am interested in your children being successful. That's my job. I mean, I wouldn't get paid if I didn't help kids' scores go up. And I like doing that. It's always a kind of fun victory lap. But really what I have adored for the last 25 years is because I'm good at doing that, I get to slip all this stuff into their brains that really matters. So for me, and I'll say this because my life, I spend all my life with people who are stressed because these tests make people nuts, right? Their parents are stressed, the kids are stressed, everyone's stressed. And I'm better at helping kids, I think, because I'm not anxious. And the biggest reason that I do TM like Bill twice a day, but also I may very possibly be one of the most well-rested people in all of DC.
Well,
And it's a value add.
and we'll take a minute and a half to say, the last 2 chapters in the book are about the delusional idea that the road to success is incredibly narrow, and it's only for the top students, and that if you ever get off this road, if you're never on it, you end up working at McDonald's. And so there's a chapter on who's ready for college, where we talk about how to determine whether a kid's ready for college, and where we kind of we talk about some of the research that suggests that it doesn't really make very much difference where you go to college in terms of your career success, in terms of your income, or your satisfaction with your career or your life. And we're big fans of telling the kids the truth so they have an accurate model of reality. And in this area, in many areas around the country, kids could grow up with a shared delusion about how you become successful and what success feels like. And our feeling is that the last chapter in the book, it's called Alternate Routes, and it's about people who screwed up here or there, or they're late bloomers, or they never went to college and became successful, or like me, they flunked out of graduate school the first time they went, then they got fired from a job typing, like me. I went the bad times, I was just so anxious and insecure, it was hard to be around, I think. But in any case, we want kids to have an accurate model of reality. And if they do, that this is a very forgiving country. You have many opportunities. You can flunk every single one of your classes in high school. You can go to Montgomery College and get 30 credits. You can apply to most colleges around the country. You don't have to show your high school transcript. So many of the kids I've seen by the time that they're in 10th grade, they aren't good students. They figure, what's the point of trying? And I tell them that if you want to do something that requires education, you're going to have to get this together, but it doesn't have to be now. It doesn't have to be this week. So the accurate model of reality is a very powerful part.
Yeah, no, so I just think about this. The person who put us together, a while ago, is a woman named Kathleen O'Connor. She's a college counselor. She's now in Texas. The wisest person I know. She's just fantastic. And she said, I tell this to people over and over. She worked with all of the most, kind of DC people, right? I mean, just incredibly good at her job. And she said, even though I've been a college counselor for 30 years, no one believes me, but the truth is this, that whom you marry matters so much more than where you go to college. Think about that, right? You know that's true from lives you've seen that have gone well or ones that have gone kind of sideways. So we end the book with this thought that, you've heard this idea before, that most people, your kids are going to forget most of what you tell them, and they're going to forget so much of what you do for them, and they're just kind of rolling by. But what we all remember, what children especially remember, is how you made them feel. And all the science we talk about in the book, it's wired into your brain how you feel. And that's the legacy, that's the gift that we want kids to have the right feelings when they go to college, right? And out into life, because our time with them is so short, right? And then they're gone, and we just hope, right? And what is it that we want, from our perspective, what do we want our children to feel, right? We want them to feel loved. That's easy, right? We want them to feel trusted. And we want them to feel supported and capable. And when you get those 4 things wired into your brain, you're highly resilient, you don't get stressed as easily, you're intrinsically motivated to go out and design and build and go after the successful life that we already want. So we really hope you'll buy the book. Part of it is that some of the things in here that we suggest feel a little scary. It feels a little bit like unilateral disarmament. If I'm the only kid not pushing my kid, right? But it's going to go better. We're going to try to change the trajectory of kind of what's going on in a lot of schools and a lot of communities if we collectively realize this is a healthier way to help children develop. So we really appreciate Mike and all the folks here at the McLean School for having you guys here, because we want you to do this together. You're going to go home and go, this makes a ton of sense, and then you're going to talk to someone who's crazy, right? And they're going to spin you up again, right? They are. That's what's going to happen. And we want you, and as Bill's pointed about this book, everything that we have in there, every chapter ends with what to do tonight, and it's very practical. And so we want you to come back to that over and over and try to work collectively with the schools to steer this in a way that we're simply helping kids develop brains that are healthy.
We have to take a couple of questions now. We want to go out and sign books to it, and we're happy to stay as late as anybody wants to stay. If you've got questions about your own kids, happy to stay and ask. We don't want to keep the bookseller here all night, so we want to head out there. Yeah.
It seems like there are two categories